AJ Tyler, welcome to the Apollo Papyrus podcast.
Thank you so much for having me. It's a pleasure to be here.
Prior to your work as an author, you were an accountant and an attorney. What was your work in those fields like?
Uh, it was interesting. I did a lot of interesting things along the way. I helped somebody buy a basketball team. I did very large transactions. A lot of my work was in the transactional field for my clients. I represented them before the taxing authorities. I helped them locate due diligence and purchase companies, provided a variety of services in that arena.
You've written, I think it's three novels. Two of them are in the Alan Miller novel series. Without spoiling too much about your two novels in the Alan Miller series, Debt Insured and Debt Discharged, what are each of those about?
Okay, well, I have one novel done, which is Death Insured, and that's been out for about 7 or 8 months now. Debt Discharge is in process. It should be out sometime, probably in the beginning of October, middle of October, as I'm going through the process of finalizing and editing. But Alan Miller is an analytics expert. So it feeds a little bit on my background as an accountant, as an attorney, as someone who did investigative work for clients. And what he does is he uncovers a plot by a manipulative woman and a craven narcissist to kill people for the insurance money. They buy the insurance policies through a product called a viatical. Once they own the policy, they find the ones that have illnesses that could be terminal or chronic, and then they kill them in an undetectable way to collect the money. Miller, along with a beautiful coroner by the name of Lara Shapiro, proceeds to uncover the plot and track down the perpetrators. There's lots of twists and turns. I always tell people the brief summary is the books are filled with sex, lies, murder, betrayal, and love. Basically, a night out in any big city.
How did your career as an accountant and an attorney influence how you wrote the Alan Miller novels, if it did so at all?
It actually had a major influence. The first book, Death Insured, was built on the idea of a viatical. And viaticals are companies that buy your life insurance policy for the discounted present value. Once they do, they keep the policy in force and they own the death benefit. It was the concept of basically gambling on someone's death that inspired me to start thinking about writing this book. Then pulled from that some other work experiences as well as some life experiences, because along the way, my wife passed away from cancer. So I took what I learned from that experience. I took what I learned from my work experience throughout my professional life, which was 30 some years of accounting, law, and consulting with businesses. And from that, built a novel.
You've also written a novel outside of the Alan Miller series, and this is titled Please Don't Call Me a Nice Guy, I Was Hoping to Date You. Without spoiling too much about that book, what is it about?
Okay. Again, it's in process. That one also will be done probably later this year, beginning of next year. It was supposed to be out earlier, but I'm struggling with the ending. And what it's about is, as I said, my wife passed away from cancer, and in my mid 40s, found myself back in the dating world. And it's very tongue in cheek. Think about Jonathan Tropper, who wrote This Is Where I Leave You. It's written in that same style. And it's basically the story of my experiences in the dating world, some of them mine, some of them other people, told in a very funny way, because I often got along the way when I would meet women and we would start to date. I'd love to date you, but you're way too nice. There's no challenge in you. And so hence the name, Please Don't Call Me a Nice Guy, I Was Hoping to Date You.
Where do you get inspiration for the plots of your novels?
It comes from everyday life. I along the way in my career, in addition to being an accountant and attorney, I was a consultant. I did a lot of work consulting with restaurants, turning around broken restaurants. I owned one at one point for 4 or 5 years. And I would sometimes sit at the bar, sometimes behind the bar, watching the interaction of people and actually trying to read people because when I was buying businesses, I had to read the table on the other side to figure out what they wanted and how to give it to them. So anything I do, anything I see is an inspiration along the way. I have a friend that's going through a hard time with a divorce. I see a character in there. I have a friend that's going through a hard time with their children. I see a character in there. The plot lines come from, for example, in Debt Discharged, the plot line begins with a business transaction I was actually involved in that the person on the other side of the table wasn't who they said they were and wasn't what they said they were. From that, I add a little murder, I add a little mayhem, I add a little chaos, and I add a lot of interesting twists and turns, and that gets people. I like to believe gets people riveted. Um, when I wrote Death Insured, I had a friend who was a literature major and gave them the book to read. They read the first chapter and said, "I can't read this. There's somebody dies. It's very dark, and I don't want to read something dark." And I said, "It's a murder mystery. You have to have at least one murder." And once they started reading, realized it's not dark. It's a roller coaster ride. You're up, you're down. Just when you think you know what's going to happen, the a switch is flipped and everything's turned upside down. And I love that when I write because the writers that I love wrote that way.
Where do you get your inspiration for the characters in your novels?
That really, I mean, that really comes from people I meet, um, uh, people that I interact with. I have a friend, for example, who was the inspiration for one of the two murderers in Death Insured. It was somebody I knew, and it wasn't that he was a murderer, but I took his character traits and used them. When I was writing Death Insured, I had a friend, and she was reading the chapters and saying, "Oh my God, I want to be the female bad guy." I'm like, "You really want me to use your name?" She said, "Yeah, I love being the bad guy." And then it was just pulling pieces and parts. I get asked a lot, "Is Alan Miller you?" Yeah, Alan Miller has pieces of me. But so does Mark Malinchek, one of the murderers. In Debt Discharged, I've got a couple new characters in addition to Miller and Shapiro, the two heroes of Death Insured. And I've pulled those from people I've met along the way. And when I meet people, I'll say, "Do you want to be in the book?" And they'll say, "Oh, yeah, yeah, I want to be in a book." Well, what do you want to be? And then from that, I take their character traits that I think will help in developing those characters.
In addition to the book you've written and the books you're currently writing as a solo author, you were one of many contributing authors to the nonfiction book, The Immigrant Men, Global Men Making an Impact in the United States and Beyond. What was it like to contribute to that book as one of many authors?
It was actually quite an honor because it was the first thing that I wrote. And it was that book went to #1 in two categories on Amazon. The publisher of Death Insured, Beyond Publishing, the principal there, Michael Butler, and I were talking on the phone about Death Insured and somehow got into a story about my grandfather's journey to the United States. He was a 12-year-old or 11-year-old orphan. His parents had been killed by Cossacks in the pogroms in the early 1900s. And he walked across Europe 3,000 miles to Italy, stowed away on a boat, and wound up in Philadelphia. My father, the youngest of his four children, 85 years later became chairman of the port that he had landed in. So and it was not too long after my father had passed away a few years ago that Michael and I had this conversation and had decided that it was a great opportunity to do an homage to my father, who always wanted to write his story and, more importantly, his father's story about his journey. One prior to the book being published, I had the opportunity to go to Dallas, meet with all the other authors, and do a blogcast interview, and had the most unbelievable night having dinner and talking to these men, most of whom wrote about themselves, but also getting to share the story of my grandfather, who I never got to meet because he passed away a year before I was born. But it was amazing. It was an amazing experience. I actually had a very short period of time to write 2,000 words, but loved the way it came out because it really, I think it caught the essence of my grandfather. And the other men in the book, once I read their stories, realized that my grandfather was in great company.
What motivates you to write?
I'll tell you, I get up every morning. When I was an accountant and an attorney, my motivation was to help my clients and do the best I could for them. Along the way, realized I love helping people. I love taking care of the people I meet. Writing for me is about the opportunity to entertain. I would have loved to have been a stand-up comedian, but I don't know that I have the oomph to get up in front of an audience and worry and bomb. If you bomb when you're writing a book, you don't know until people start writing bad reviews. But so far, almost all the reviews have been 5-star. I have a lot of friends and people that I've met along the way that when I tell them what I do, they buy the book and then reach out to me and say, "Oh my God, this was so good. When's the next book coming out?" Like I couldn't, and I get a lot of times they'll say to me, "Oh my God, this was so good. I couldn't put it down." And I always respond with, "Well, that's the glue we put on the cover of the book." But honestly, it's the pleasure of knowing that someone is sitting by a pool, on a beach, in their bedroom, wherever, reading my book and being entertained. That's the greatest inspiration for writing.
Regarding Debt Insured, as that's the only book you've written as a solo author that's published at the time we're recording this interview. How long did it take you to write that book, and how long has it taken you to write your other 2 novels?
Death Insured, I began probably in 2016. I put it down for a few years. And then during COVID, when I live in Florida now and we were locked down, every day I get up to say, I'm going to write a chapter. It basically took me 4 months from where I was when I picked it up to finish writing it. And then it took me a year and a half of editing to get to the point where I was happy with the book and the way it came out. And then to publication. To me, Debt Discharged, it took me 6 months to write. Please Don't Call Me a Nice Guy. I probably have another 10 chapters to write. And when I finish editing Debt Discharged, I'll go back to that. Probably 9 months to write. If you compress all the time and the gaps when I wasn't writing, just because it was so great I have to be in the right frame of mind to write the different styles of books.
What are the easiest and hardest aspects of writing fiction for you?
I tell people when they say, what's the hardest part about writing it? The hardest thing to write for me, and this may not be for everyone, is writing sex scenes, because you don't want to be lurid. If you add sex as part of the novel, and you want to be erotic without being dirty. The other thing that's really hard to write, which I'm wrestling with, and Please Don't Call Me a Nice Guy, is humor, because everybody's sense of humor is based on something different. So sometimes you have people that have this amazing, they pick up on the subtlest of things and can laugh at it. And then you make subtle jokes and no one gets it. And that's both the easy and the hard part. Beyond that, it's that I was never a great science guy. And I have friends who are great science people, but when I have to write murder in an undetectable way, I have to lean on my friends who have experience, either medical experience or otherwise, because it enhances the plot when you don't know if it was a murder or natural causes. So
now, regarding the 3 books you've written as a solo author, or are writing as a solo author, is Debt Insured independently, traditionally, or hybrid published? I know you mentioned the name of the publisher of that book, and will the other 2 books be published the same way?
They may be published with Beyond, although a couple other hybrids have reached out to me. I've also had a couple people that would like to, after having read Death Insured, want to help me find an agent. But as I'm sure you know, getting representation is very hard. Um, I have a very long business career and a very deep Rolodex, and I've never wanted to prey on that Rolodex to get people to help me. But now but when I wrote Death Insured, it was really just about, it was on the bucket list. I always wanted to write a novel. I've loved reading. My passion for reading began at the age of 16 when I read Dalton Trumbo's book, Johnny Got His Gun. And from there, it was mysteries. Lawrence Sanders, Greg Iles, a lot of good Harlan Coben, Daniel Silva, great authors who inspired me to want to write. And the idea was, I'm going to write one book. I'm going to publish it. If I sell 10 copies, it'll be 10 members of my family, and that's great. And then what happened was I started giving it to people, and people started buying it. And the inspiration to write more just started flowing because of all the compliments I got, both on the drafts of the book and the final version. So now it's about doing this not just because it's a glamour process, but because it's a profession. I love getting up every morning to write. So I want to find people who, even if it's a hybrid publisher, will partner with me to make my book reach the greatest audience.
And as a point of clarification, is Beyond Publishing a hybrid publisher, or is it a different type?
No, they're hybrid.
Okay. One final question. What is the best advice you could offer to anyone who wants to write a fictional novel or another type of fictional book, like a novella, a short story collection, a poetry collection, or so on?
I meet a lot of people and they all say to me, I have a great story. I want to write it. So I tell people two things. Number one, you may believe it's a great story, but that doesn't mean you're going to make a lot of money if that's your belief. So don't go in thinking I'm going to become the next John Grisham. The main thing I would tell them when they want to write is sit down and start journaling and read it and reread it and write it and rewrite it like it's something that you would buy in a bookstore. And if you think it's something you would download or something you would purchase, then maybe it's time to put it into a different format. But every day I get up and write. Some days I write one chapter. Some days I write 5 chapters. Some days I write 3 sentences and then go, okay, I'm not in that space in my head where I can write. So give yourself a space to work. Get in front of the computer or a pad of paper and a pen, get yourself in the right mindset, and every day try and produce a little bit of what you want to write. And you'd be amazed if you do a little bit every day, how in a week or a month or 2 months, you have chapters written, you have poetry written, you have novellas written, whatever it is you're aspiring to put down on paper.
AJ, thank you for appearing on the Apollo Papyrus podcast. You were an amazing guest to interview.
Aaron, thank you so much for having me. I love doing these because who doesn't love to talk about their passion? And I appreciate you having me on.
This podcast episode is intended for the private listening of our audience. Any reuse or retransmission of this podcast episode without the express written consent of the podcast host is prohibited except under fair use guidelines. Royalty-free music and sound effects obtained from https://www.zapsplat.com.